Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the Mexican-American War, which had huge results for America and yet is not very well known. If you recall, at the time, James K. Polk talked about all of Texas and all of Oregon. We have a dispute with Canada and England about Oregon territory, and we have a dispute with Mexico about the Southwestern territory. And Polk's claim was, I'm going to take all that land, or I'm going to start a war with England and a war with Mexico. And if you recall, the way that we settled our problems with England is that we sat down and we talked about it like grown-ups, and eventually we shook hands and we split the land down in half, and down the middle. Everyone's happy, and we avoided war because we didn't want to start a war with a rich, powerful neighbor. Thing is, Mexico is not half as strong as England is, and we don't have a lot of trade with them like we did with England. So people don't mind going to war with Mexico like they would mind going to war with England. So instead of compromise, instead of talking about it like grown-ups, we decided to bully Mexico and steal whatever land we wanted by force. And that's how we got the southwestern United States. Let's look at some of the causes of the war. First of all, when America annexes Texas, that made Mexico very angry at us because they believed that the Texan War for Independence was unfair. And us taking it basically told the world that we thought it was okay. So they're angry at us. And then there was a disputed border. You see right here is the Rio Grande, and that is a large river. That is the modern day border of Texas. That's what the Texas Republic was claiming. Well, Mexico claimed that Texas only owned to the Nueces River, which was up here, which would actually cut that land in about a third. So when we take the states, we do have a border dispute with Mexico, just like we had a border dispute with Canada and England. And then, of course, Mexico knows our plan of Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny says, God says it's okay for us to take the entire continent from Atlantic to Pacific. I don't know how you can get that from the Bible, but there you go. And of course, Mexico owned much of the Southwest, and America said, yeah, well, we're going to get it one day because God wants us to. So they know we're gunning for them. There's been a hostility and arrogance, a history of hostility, of America saying we're better than Mexico because we're white and they're only kind of white, just really dumb, but also we're richer and have a much bigger military than Mexico, so we feel like it's okay for us to bully them, which of course it is not. We tried to reach a peace settlement, which we'll talk about in a second, which was not a very honest peace settlement, but then we decided just to declare war instead. Border dispute erupted into full-blown war. A very large minority of Americans felt that attacking Mexico and taking all their land was totally unfair and unjust and was not the right thing to do. They said it's a war of aggression. A war of aggression is when you start a war to get your neighbor's stuff. You covet your neighbor's land, your neighbor's money, your neighbor's mineral wealth. You say, I want it, so give it to me or I'll kill you. That is exactly what America did in the Mexican-American War, and plenty of Americans said it is wrong, we should not do it, but of course we did it anyway. A lot of other Americans look at this as just a shameless land grab for more slave states. All this land is in the South, and therefore, according to the Missouri Compromise, could be turned into slave states, and that makes a lot of Northerners upset. We don't want slavery to spread anymore. Congress calls the war unnecessary and unconstitutional. So the Constitution does not allow us to attack our neighbors to steal their land. And they're blaming President Polk for starting the war, which I think is very fair to blame him for the war. John Slidell was our ambassador to Mexico, and he was sent to the capital, Mexico City, ordered to buy Texas, New Mexico, and California, which is basically all this land right here, a huge chunk of land from Mexico. But he only was given a shockingly small amount of money, and he was told to buy about half of Mexico. And I don't know how you would feel if someone said, I want to buy half of America from you and take it from my own country. And what if Mexico offered to buy half of America and take it away from us? We wouldn't be happy with that. And then if it was a tiny amount of money, we'd be even more upset. Besides, this is some of the best land that Mexico owned at the time. California had all the gold and silver in it, and we're like, yeah, well, just give it to us for pennies. And they said no. They not only said no, they were really insulted that we would even offer. And I think they were right to be insulted. So they sent the ambassador home. And so that told Polk, oh, well, we tried to be nice. We tried to buy it. And they said no. So now we have to conquer it by force. Or you could just take no for an answer. No means no. If someone says they don't want to sell, you can't make them sell. Well, unless you have a bigger army, and then you could absolutely make them sell, which is what we do, because might makes right, huh? No, it doesn't. This guy is Zachary Taylor. He was a veteran of the War of 1812. He was the general in charge of the Mexican-American War at first. His nickname is Old Rough and Ready. He was known for dressing and acting very casually and dressing very sloppily. In fact, he very rarely wore his uniform, and when he did wear his uniform, he never had all his braids and medals and insignia. So there is actually this one story near the beginning of the war. There's this meeting called for all the top generals and colonels and majors and whoever, all the officers are called to the general's tent for this major strategy meeting. And so in comes one of these high officers, and he's a little bit early, so he throws his shoes towards the servant who was sitting outside the door and said, "Shine my shoes for me. I want the general to think highly of me." So he then throws $1 at this guy, just some old servant at the door of the tent. So he says, "Okay," and he shines the shoe and puts the dollar coin in his pocket, and then walks in and says, "Hi, I'm General Taylor." He was just wearing his ordinary clothes, and hair's all messed up, and people think he's the general's servant. No, he's the general. Um, old, rough and ready. He would fight in the front lines with people, and he never acted like he was better than everyone else, which a lot of American army officers really did treat everyone else like that. I'm better than you because I'm an officer, and not this guy. He was pretty cool. The soldiers loved him because of how casual he was. There's this disputed territory between the Nueces River right here and the Rio Grande right here. All this green area is claimed by both America and Mexico. So President Polk orders him to move his army into the disputed territory, which is definitely provoking. If Mexico claims it and you claim it, I don't think either side should send an army into the disputed territory until you make your compromise and draw the border for real. Polk says, well, it's all ours, so we can have our army wherever we want. Mexico says, no, that's ours, so you just invaded our country. And after a few weeks of the American army in what Mexico feels is Mexican land, the Mexican army attacked. And everyone's like, oh no, I'm so surprised. No one's really surprised. They knew Mexico would do that, but this is President Polk's way of blaming the Mexicans for starting the war. Oh, it's Mexico's fault. They shot first. A lot of Americans said, no, we provoked them. We invaded them. It's not their fault for attacking. They felt like they were defending themselves. Very famously, there was a young senator by the name of Abraham Lincoln, who is a young nobody, and he gets famous for criticizing the war and for demanding to know where that first battle was. And he has a speech that people call the spotted speech, because it says, on what spot was this first battle fought? Was it fought on American territory, or was it fought on Mexican territory, or contested territory? Did we have any business going there, and can we really blame the Mexicans for attacking us? But of course, not a lot of people listen to him. Congress declared war in May 1846. After two very quick early victories, Zachary Taylor attacked Monterey. You may know Monterey as the town where Monterey Jack cheese comes from, and Monterey Jack cheese is literally named after a guy named Jack from Monterey who was a cheese trader. So there you go. In Monterrey, the Mexicans had a very slightly larger force, but the American army is much better trained and has much newer and better equipment, and so he did very well. A young Ulysses S. Grant was in charge of a cannon team, and they managed to get their cannon up to the top of a bell tower in the middle of Monterrey and shoot around and won a great victory. Monterrey, I can't even see in this map, it's too tiny. Where's Monterrey? Is that the one right here? That's Monterrey right there, northern Mexico. Taylor is in the news all the time as the winning general, the general who's just winning fight after fight after fight. He's incredibly popular in his troops, and now he's getting popular everywhere else. And no one really knows what his politics are, but everyone knows if he wants to, if he runs for president, he might win. So Pierce and Polk, the other politicians say, let's get rid of him because he's getting too popular. So they fire Zachary Taylor, not really fire him, but kind of push him to the side so he's not in the spotlight anymore. And they appoint another general, Winfield Scott, to do the final push into the capital, Mexico City, and end the war. Meanwhile, almost all of Taylor's soldiers are taken away from him and given to Winfield Scott. He's left with just 4,500 soldiers, which is a very small force. Santa Anna attacks Zachary Taylor. He has 15,000 men. Taylor has 4,500 men. And guess who wins? Taylor won, which is, just absolutely amazing. If he had been left with his whole army and it was 15,000 to 15,000, that wouldn't have been as exciting. But 15,000 to 4,500, that made newspaper headlines and made him even that much more popular. Santa Anna eventually retreated. This is Winfield Scott. He is almost the exact opposite of General Taylor. They call him Old Fuss and Feathers because he was so formal every day, all day, every day. People joke that he would wear his uniform to sleep because he was always in this fresh uniform, freshly ironed, gold braids everywhere, all his medals out on display, always very proper and prim. He's the old gentleman. Winfield Scott says, it is taking too long to just walk all the way down from Monterrey all the way to Mexico City. It's going to take too long. So I'm going to take the Navy, go all the way down to Veracruz, and then just have this short hop inland. And that's exactly what he does. Wins a great battle at Veracruz. 3 times Santa Anna gets between him and Mexico City, and every time Winfield Scott was able to outmaneuver him, get behind Santa Anna, and force Santa Anna to retreat. So he's doing an incredible job as well. So now we have 2 really amazing generals, Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott. Very different personality, but both are good at winning. And in September 14th, 1847, we attacked and captured the city of Mexico City, the capital of Mexico, and the war is pretty much over there. We have their capital city. Meanwhile, we had sent soldiers across the Midwest and Southwest. There was a guy named Joseph Kearny who went to New Mexico, and there is almost no fighting at all as he captures New Mexico. There were only a handful of Mexican soldiers there, and they all retreated. Hi. Go. All right. So there were a lot of American settlers in New Mexico, just like there were a lot of American settlers in Texas. So actually, when Kearny came and said, "Hey, I'm going to conquer this area with like just a handful of soldiers," a lot of the people were actually okay with that. John C. Fremont was sent out to California. Actually, even before the war started, he went out to California with the mission of helping California achieve independence from Mexico. And he actually did that and created its own country called the Bear Flag Republic before he heard about the Mexican-American War. He had American soldiers out there fighting Mexican soldiers and creating this new country. And then they're like, "Oh, you hear there's a war with Mexico? Oh, well, okay." Kind of weird. The thing is, even though we do look at this as a war of aggression, there's lots of Californians who do not want to live in Mexico. There's lots of Mexican people who hate their government so much they're totally fine with joining America or starting their own thing. The Mexican government was a really bad government. They had all sorts of coups and civil wars and dictators and whatever. So there's plenty of Mexicans who feel okay with that. I don't think that really justifies the American military conquering it for ourselves, but going independent at least doesn't seem so bad to me. All right, what were some results of the Mexican-American War? Well, Santa Anna was defeated for the second time in a decade. He lost to Texas. Now he loses the Mexican-American War. Many casualties on both sides. There were actually about twice as many people died of sickness as bullets, which was very common ratio back then. 79,000 Americans fought and 13,000 Americans died. That's a larger percentage of casualties than in World War I or World War II. Not as many casualties. Obviously, in World War II, you'd have 13,000 die a day some days, but a larger percentage than in either World War. It provided a lot of training for the Civil War. This is only about a decade before the Civil War is going to wind up. And there were plenty of officers who were young men here who are then going to lead the armies of both sides. Some famous names include President Zachary Taylor. The politicians were right to fear Taylor's politics. As soon as he ran for president, people voted for him and he became president rough and ready. Franklin Pierce was an officer in the Mexican-American War, and he became president as well. In the North, three of the most famous Union generals in the Civil War were Ulysses S. Grant, General Meade, and General McClellan. McClellan actually ran for president once and lost to Lincoln, and they all fought in this war. Grant famously said that he hated the war and thought it was just us bullying a weaker neighbor. And as soon as his tour of duty was over, Grant quit the Army because of how disgusted he was with the Army, and he became a farmer until the Civil War. Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were both there fighting in the Mexican-American War. When we captured Mexico City, we captured all their politicians, and with our army outside, we forced them to sign a peace treaty called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The peace treaty said America gets Texas all the way to the Rio Grande, making our southern border there. We give them $15 million to buy all the rest of this territory, which is a tiny amount of money for the time. And we're buying half of Mexico for a tiny amount of money, but they have to sign it because our entire army is parked outside. Polk fired our first negotiator for offering too much to the Mexicans, being too kind. So we got a meaner one, which is just sad. All right, a few years later, we send Mr. Gadsden down to buy this little bit of land because we thought it would be an ideal place to run a railroad, a transcontinental railroad in the South. And so Ambassador Gadsden is sent with $10 million to buy that, and that completes the continental United States. So from the very beginning, we were on the Atlantic coast of America. And then in the Revolution, the British gave us all the way to the Mississippi. And then not too long later, we bought the Louisiana Purchase. And then around this time period, we settled with England for the Oregon and Washington territory up in the north. And then we bought or conquered, stole kind of all this land down here in the Southwest. And that is the last purchase of land in the continental United States. After this, we just get Hawaii and Hawaii and Alaska, and a couple tiny other islands that we'll talk about at a later time.